In one of Thunderfoot's recent videos, I think it was called something like Stagnation of YouTube, he used a kind of biological metaphor to describe how the ecosystem of YouTube worked, you know, how channels got bigger or withered away and died, you know, just how the system worked to support certain channels and didn't work to support others, those kind of things. And he was basically saying that the ecology had changed now, so it's actually much more difficult for a new life form, you might say, to evolve into a much more complex state, like a tall tree or something like that. Or, in other words, you suggested it's quite hard for small channels to get big. I don't think he's right. But one of the things he said as part of that was he said that I think the phrase he used was the barriers to entry were different. Barriers to entry. And that, I've been running through that phrase in my mind a bit since. And I was thinking how it works in terms of the metaphor that he uses, the biological metaphor, and then how it works on YouTube. I think it's slightly incorrect. So I want to just run that metaphor through and then change it a bit and then see how my version of that metaphor plays out in terms of YouTube. Because the equivalent of a barrier to entry in biological terms isn't evolution. It isn't evolutionary development, it's not natural selection. Those aren't the entry points, are they? The entry point in evolutionary terms, in biological terms, is the moment of biogenesis. That's where chemicals enter the life world, so to speak. That's when life starts to take place. That's the entry point, biogenesis. And as far as we know, I mean, we may be wrong, but as far as we know, on this planet certainly, it seems to have only happened once, and all of the life forms, you, me, the flower on the plant on the windowsill, the tree outside in the garden, all this stuff is a result of that one biogenesis event. Now YouTube isn't like that. YouTube hasn't got that as a barrier to entry. It's not such a difficult place to enter that only one channel started up. No, the barriers to entry, the biogenesis equivalent in YouTube, is very, very low indeed. The barrier to entry is low, the biogenesis point is very easy. Because the equivalent is just simply making a channel, isn't it? And anybody can make a channel. You can make a channel in 2 minutes. It's really easy. As long as you've got an email account somewhere, you can do it. So biogenesis is not the problem. There's no barrier to entry. All the difficulties in YouTube and the way the system works beyond that point is after the entry point, not before it. So let me just see if I can play out the equivalent of YouTube's biogenesis on the real biological model. You know, if this world, if the world of life on this planet was the same as YouTube, if it had the same low barriers to entry, if it was easy to start life as it is to start a channel, I mean, what would that look like? Well, it wouldn't look anything like this. I mean, the fact that we have the diversity of life that we have, and the complexity of life, and the kind of interrelatedness of all the life forms that we have, and the relatively smooth kind of homeostatic sets of principles, dynamic homeostatic principles that we call ecologies, is largely because we've only had one biogenesis moment. I mean, what would it be like if biogenesis really did happen all the time, as some creationists kind of suggest? You know, every time you opened a jar of peanut butter, there was a new biogenesis life form emerging, or you came down from the bed one morning and there's biogenesis taking place in the scum on top of your dishwater, something like that. It's happening. It would be happening all the time. That would be the equivalent. That it would be as easy to start a new life form as it was to start a channel. I mean, that would be a completely different biological world. You know, we wouldn't have got to the stage we're at for a start off. We would need complex life as we know it, which is basically built on a system of arms races and checks and balances and all the kinds of dynamic systems that take place in an interrelated system emerging from a single biogenesis event. That could not have happened. It would be a much simpler system, much more crude system. Because biogenesis moments would not just be happening on the dirty dishwater and in the milk and the peanut butter. They would be happening everywhere. They'd be happening inside every cell of my body. They'd be happening inside every bacterial cell in my body, inside the phages that are in the bacterial cells in my body, that are in the hair follicles. They're everywhere. Constant biogenesis moments happening at every level of complexity, effectively preventing anything interesting from taking off, apart from the most simple, the most brutal, the most hard-skinned, the most defensive, the most self-serving. If you can get a few of those going, yes, they could develop and they could resist biogenesis taking place. But aside from that, you wouldn't get complex life forms. Now that seems to me to be quite a reasonable descriptor of how YouTube does work actually. There are systems in place which make it not quite as crude as I've suggested there, but generally it is an environment in which channels are constantly raining into the system. Sock account channels are constantly raining into the system. Accounts which are set up purely for the purposes of flagging, purely for the purposes of false DMCAing, purely for the purpose of down rating. Constant flurry of new life, new channels constantly emerging, effectively destroying anything if they're not too careful. That's kind of what happens, and the example that Thunderfoot gave, where he's on the forest floor showing all these little clover leaves, I think they were, nestling at the foot of a tall tree. It'd be much more like thousands of weeds constantly growing and choking off any life form before it even got a chance to get past stage 1, because of the plethora of biogenesis events, videogenesis events. And that's, I think, one of the problems with YouTube. Now, I don't think it can be solved, but if you were to solve that problem, one way to approach solving it might be to do the opposite, actually, of what Thunderfoot suggests, and make the barriers to entry actually more difficult. At the moment, as I say, it's painfully easy to make a channel, but maybe it shouldn't be quite that easy, or maybe another system should be set up where it isn't quite that easy. Maybe there's a way of making channels and groups of channels not just flurry into the system ad hoc, but groups of channels grow and divide the way that cells grow and divide and mutate, and small colonies of channels forming, and then those colonies branching off and forming more colonies. So rather than it being, as I say, a kind of welter of newness, a welter of biogenesis, a welter of videogenesis events, it's much more like a biological growth with diversity happening gradually across a complex system, and the differentiation adding to the complexity and adding to the potential creative potential of that system, which, as I say, is not helped by the constant downpour of videogenesis crap which we have right now. Anyway, thank you very much.